Good evening and thank you for joining us on the program The Nigerian Governors Live, reaching you live from Abuja. The impact of COVID-19 pandemic goes beyond Nigeria's borders. Around the world, countries are struggling to overcome an economic downturn brought about by the pandemic. But even before COVID-19, holding governors accountable to budget-based performance has always been an uphill task in Nigeria. Despite the many institutions and states to ensure that expenditure is structured, governors in states seem more than often to bulldoze their way through governance without any checks. The fact that accounts of local governments are always readily available for state governors to spend has more or less paralyzed governance at the third tier of government. There's still no effective instrument to ensure accountability in states after 21 years of uninterrupted democracy. Today on the program, we shall be discussing the topic holding state governors accountable to budget systems. My guest, Mr. Hamzat Lawal, who is an activist. He has successfully led grassroots campaigns in over 40 African countries. He's currently the founder, chief executive of Connected Development. We'll go on a quick break, and when we come back, we'll go straight into the conversation. Stay with us.
Nigerian governors.
Welcome back, and the program is the Nigerian Governors Live, reaching you live from the city of Abuja. Yes, just before that break, I told you that my guest in the studio is not the person but Mr. Hamzat Lawal. Mr. Hamzat, thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you for having me.
For a long time, I've been hoping I would sit down with you like this and have a conversation about the situation in the country. But this time around, we're going to be looking at particularly the governors. And I know for a fact that you've had a chance to travel across Nigeria and work with most state governors. But just for a way of starting, what has that experience been like?
It's been interesting, I would say, because usually when I travel to states, I don't just stop at the capital, because in the capital you'll see investment in infrastructure, you would see beautiful serene, but when you travel just 10 or 20 kilometers out of the state's capital, that's in some states where you can actually travel as much as even 20 or 30 kilometers. Then you wonder, you know, the discrepancy and the disconnect between the reality on the grassroots at the local government and what's happening, you know, in the state's capital. So for me, I found it really interesting and intriguing where governors are saying one thing, and then what's actually obtainable on the ground is different from what the governors are saying. And it shows that large communications gap, that disconnect, and that fake reality that they most often live in as state executive. You know, so for me, engaging and working with various young people in all these local governments in the states and connecting what is happening on the ground and what the governors are saying, and also sharing information with citizens so they get more informed, they get more aware, and hopefully they can hold their governors to account across Nigeria.
Okay, so let's look at this. On an annual basis, state governors go through the ritual of preparing budgets which are presented to state houses of assembly. Are these documents for real? Do governors actually implement these budgets?
No, they don't actually go ahead to implement these budgets. And some of them would always say that there's deficit, that's income deficit, they lack finances to actually see through this budget, or some of them would say, oh, the federal government is not allowing us to access loan or credit facilities from international or multilateral institutions. But most time, the budget is not, you know, it's not implemented. But even before we get to implementation, let's even take the budget circulates itself. So the executive governor, ideally what should happen is a memo is sent to all the MDAs, so that's all the ministries, departments and agencies, to forward in their draft budget to the budget office through the Commissioner of Budget and Planning at the state's level. So it goes to him, he puts them together, he takes it to the executive council meeting, so that's where you have all the commissioners chaired by the executive governor. They deliberate on it and they have a final document. They write a letter to the State House of Assembly informing the speaker that the governor wants to make a budget presentation.
Okay.
And then the governor goes and make a budget presentation giving highlights and giving summary of the budget and specifically focused on what would be their priority and why the priority, how would they get money to finance the budget. And then he presents the budget. Then the next phase is the State Assembly will call for a public hearing from various MDAs to come and defend the budget. And in this public hearing, ideally, they're meant to also invite the media and invite key stakeholders, both at the private sector and civil society that have interest in that area. So for instance, if it's on health, the Commissioner of Health will come, civil society that work around health will come and listen to the Commissioner of Health defend the budget. After that process, the State Assembly would pass the budget during plenary without any objection. And in some cases, if they need to amend some areas of the budget, mind you, this budget is an appropriation, it's a bill, it's law.
Sure.
You know, so when they pass, then the governor would sign at a ceremony, he would sign the budget, so it becomes law. So what this actually means is after the executive governor signs, this budget must, by law, it must be implemented. And in any case where, so for instance, you know, in the middle of the year we had the pandemic. So what would happen is you have to send an amendment bill of the budget. So you have to have a supplementary, you have to send a supplementary proposal to the State Assembly so it gets passed and then the governor can spend. Because, you know, during COVID you have to now start buying PPAs. You need to buy sanitizers, you need to buy face masks, you need to provide palliative, you need to provide stimulus package to states so that they can, you know, you could help cushion the effect of COVID. Because ideally, you're not supposed to spend any single money from the state government's account without appropriation by the State Assembly. That is the reality. Or rather, that is what is meant to be. Now, let's go to reality.
That's on paper, right?
That's on paper. So now let me take you through what happens in states. So what happens is the governor would call the SSG, the secretary to the state government. He would call the commissioner. He would call some of his advisors, and then he would say, the last year budget was this amount. Let's show the states and let's make the world feel like, yes, we're very serious. So if it was maybe a budget of 2 billion, we said let's make it 10 billion. So they think, you know, we are very ambitious. And let's just allocate money for mostly capital expenditure. So let's say we want to build bridge. Nothing like needs assessment. Nothing like states of implementation of the previous budget. And not all the commissioners will be involved. Maybe they'll just call that of Commissioner for Works, you know, in the states, bring Commissioner for Planning, and bring some of his economic advisors. And then they put together a budget document. Then they will just, you know, inform the speaker that he should convey plenary that the governor is coming on this so date to present the budget. So the governor goes to the State Assembly, he presents the budget, and in reality, what the governor presents, so there's no public hearing, no call for memoranda, nothing. They would pass it verbatim, and then the governor signs it into law, and that's it. And I can even take you to instances where governors will just go to a community and just say, you know what, tomorrow I want a road to be constructed here. It's not on the appropriation law. It has not been tendered to the State Assembly. It has not been debated, and it will start happening.
So in a normal situation, these are very impeachable
Oh yes,
offenses.
this is gross abuse and misconduct of an executive governor, even with his immunity. So ideally, this is an abuse of office and privilege. So this alone should institutionalize a committee that would look into the governor's action by the State Assembly. So ideally, a committee would be set up, because when you want to impeach the governor, a committee will be set up. He'll come and defend, you know, he'll come and defend himself, and then in plenary they will debate, and then a vote would be put in forward. But ideally, again, and maybe we should talk politics in the aspect of the budget and even the constitutionality or the formation of the State Assembly. Most of our State Assembly members are poster boys to the executive governor.
That leads me to the second question. So why is it difficult to hold governors accountable in the states? Why does it seem institutions are dead in the states? Because when you look at democracy, one of the institutions that really, entrenches democracy is the houses of assembly or the legislature, as the case may be. Why does it seem so?
So I'll take you through a scenario of a speaker of the state assembly. So in the level of hierarchy in the state, the governor is the number one, the deputy is two, and the speaker is three. And the role of the state assembly is to hold the executive to account, create laws, and ensure that they're also monitoring implementation of what the executives are doing, right?
Yes.
Now, I'll take you through a real life scenario in a state, I will not mention the name of the state, where in my presence, the speaker came to see the governor and he bent down to greet the governor. He bent down and he was greeting the executive governor. How would you as a speaker hold that kind of person to account if he abused his powers and privileges? I was about to say the other time that politically speaking, these governors in most cases install or appoint these state assembly members. How do I mean? Yes, they conduct elections, but they would be the one to say this is the person representing this constituency in the state assembly. In some cases, some of these governors go as far as buying them their party nomination form and expression of interest form. They even go as far as, funding their campaign, to get elected. So how would you, when the governor self-appoints you, pays for your party nomination form, fund your campaign, and make sure you got elected, you want to now hold him to account? How is that possible? Today, before a few weeks ago, there was that strike where the judiciary and the state assembly went on strike, and because they were asking for autonomy, state, legislative autonomy and, judiciary autonomy. The governors don't want you to be autonomous. If you're autonomous, that means you'll be so powerful that in no time you can impeach a governor who is not abiding by the rule of law. But the governors want to be in control of state resources and most importantly, local government resources, because local government resources is even much more than the state resources. In a state like Kano, for instance, they have over 40 local governments. Imagine the allocation that goes to each of these local governments. But the governors, no, they want to control these resources. In our states, the governors are demigods. No one can question them. We've had instances where some of our community reporters, because we have radio programs in some of the states, where they would go on air educating, populace, and then they will get calls, they will get threatened, that they will get calls that, oh, you're trying to, you're insulting the governor, or you're working against the governor, or you're an opposition. So in most states, be it journalists, even be it legislators, they don't have any say. When the governor says anything, the governor's saying is law in the states, and it's quite sad. So you talked about institutions. It's only the state assembly that can really hold the governor to account, and judiciary. But right now, you have governors buying SUVs, in some states, and I'm sure a few also know the state I'm referring to. You have governors buying SUVs for state legislators, for judiciary workers, for judges. So how would you give an injunction against that sitting governor when, in short, where is the moral standard?
Let's move on now. The Fiscal Responsibility Bill of 2007 was introduced to change the bureaucracy of public administration by making the public service more effective. Now, to society by encouraging the development and economic expansion. To what extent has this been successful in the states? In the state?
Yes. I would use Adamawa State as an example, because I met with the chairman of the State Fiscal Responsibility Board. Interestingly, before that meeting, 2 years before that meeting, I was appointed by the executive governor to be on the board as a civil society representative, because I've been working across the 36 states. So in some cases, we get invited to sit on state government board, agency board. I declined that appointment, by the then governor of Adamawa State, and my reason was clear. When I got the appointment, it was just an offer letter from the state, the secretary to the state government, conveying a message that the executive governor have appointed me as the head of Connected Development. And in that letter, they did not add my terms of reference. They didn't add specific deliverables, because for me, I want to also be held accountable on my deliverables. And so I replied first, and I said, can I get my terms of reference? How many times would we be sitting as a board? When we sit, what are we supposed to discuss? Yes, it's captured in the law in terms of what the board is supposed to do, but I need a TOR, because I don't just want the governor to go and report back, to his partners and say, or to international community and say, oh yeah, we have a civil society representative. In short, Hamza is the one on the board. I don't want anyone to use my image to launder, their misgiving. So I waited a couple of weeks. I sent a reminder, no response. So I declined. I said, we cannot join the State Fiscal Responsibility Board when you're not even wanting to be responsible. You don't want me to have a legally binding document that shows my terms of reference. And speaking about, this board one is supposed to also look at how is government generating revenue? How is this revenue being put to use? Also, the board is meant to get interface with citizens, collect feedback on, projects, on what the citizens need, and then inform it through the budget system. But most cases, just political appointees in the state level. Because when I met the board and members of the board, I paid an advocacy visit.
Okay.
And that was last year, just during COVID last year, yes. I asked, so what have you people actually done? So all I got was, they are planning to do this. They are planning to do that. I'm like, so you are still planning. When are you going to execute this plan? So most of them are saying, oh, the shortfall in even resources for us to undertake our duty. So we don't even have, income. We don't have revenues to do outreaches, to collect feedback, to do survey, to inform government policies and decision. So and then again, I told myself I was glad and I'm happy that decision I make a few years before then actually exonerates me from
But
this
this is
kind of
just one
misgiving.
state.
Oh, this is just one state.
Okay.
And some states, they don't even have boards. They don't have fiscal responsibility board. And mind you also, it's the governor that still appoints board members. Yes, ideally when you get appointed, yes, you're supposed to go for clearance to the state assembly. But have you seen any state assembly reject any nominee of the governor?
No.
So how?
Hardly ever happens.
So that's the reality we currently face ourselves. But how can we overcome this? First, I was really excited about the ambitious plan of the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit. At that time, the new boss wanted to ensure that local government money hits local government accounts directly, because what happens in the state is there's a joint account between the state and the local government. And when this money goes to the state, the joint account, the governors will convey all the local government chairmen and give them a form to sign that they've received the money, but they actually, so on paper they've received the money, but the money did not go to the local government. Because ideally, if projects are being implemented by the local government, there will be less, or there'll be little or no pressure on both federal and state government, because local government is closer to the people at the grassroots. So ideally, education, primary health care is supposed to be taken care of by the local government. All those, local intervention, so that the state government can work on more of, territory, work on more bigger projects that connect to, towns or community, while the national government will just work on, ensuring that, we have our territory, sovereignty of our territory and international laws and, dealing with multilaterals. But in the case of the local governments, it doesn't. But NFIU came with that policy and say, now this money goes straight to the local government. There's a state in the Northeast, again I won't mention, the first time ever, they had about 30 million naira hit their account after, allocation,
That's
the
local
sharing,
government
yes,
now.
after the sharing of, FAC by federal, state and local government. So, because when the policy was brought first, it was, at that early stage, it was being implemented. But mind you, the state governor, if you remember, they took the federal government and NFIU to court.
True.
They took them to the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court would interpret, if the government, if the government have the right to take joint account money and put in local government. But the story is, I got a call from a local government chairman in the Northeast, one of the northeastern states, and he was saying, Hamza, X amount of money, over 30 million have just hit the local government account. I don't even have a system to utilize this money. Because then what NFIU wanted to do was, if you would make a payment above 500,000, it must be wire transfer so that they can monitor. Because before now, governors would issue teller, they will be collecting cash withdrawal. And when you withdraw cash, you can't follow cash money.
Yes.
That's also our problem with, this whole conditional cash transfer payment that the federal government is undertaking. So NFIU is saying our policy with any transaction above 500,000 must be wire transfer. So local government pays salaries to teachers, And this has to be a bulk payment or above 500,000. But there is no system. The local government don't have the capacity. They don't have a system or process to pay salaries that would go to accounts of individuals. So that money was in that account for over 2 months. They could not touch the money because you can only withdraw cash.
Even though there was a law backing
yes,
them.
there was a policy backing
yeah.
to even make them independent so that they can bring dividends of democracy to the people. But they don't have capacity. They don't have a system or structure in place. And then they were calling me to help them. And it will take a while to build capacity, to put in system, to work with the bank, to work with the financial instruments, to work with the software. So it was even a lot on code. Don't even have the capacity to help them because we need resources. We need to start hiring consultants and deploying them to the states or bringing these people to Abuja to train them. And it even shows you that there's a huge gap between the kind of people we even elect into office to manage our resources and to provide us laws and regulation and to implement these laws and regulations.
You know, it appears there's so much to unpack.
Oh, yeah.
When you just talking about this alone, particularly when it comes to the issue of local government. But then let's look at, since you mentioned the Northeast particularly, let's look at the issue of security. Now, the security situation in the country seems to have provided some governors the perfect excuse to squander state resources without any tangible project. Is this assertion correct?
Oh, very much correct. So you see governors now hiding under the fact that, oh, due to insecurity, we can't even pay minimum wage. Or we're just paying, some governors now are paying percentage-wise. And then, you know, they hide under the guise of, oh, in this insecurity, there's clash in my community. You know, in this area, there's already lockdown or there's curfew, so we really can't do much. But these governors get security votes. And you and I don't even know how much is a security vote or what they use the security vote for. It's just an untouchable money that it's only, you know, the powers that be that knows how much the security vote is and what they actually do with this money. So you get security votes, yet there's high level of insecurity. And then the governors would always argue that it's the federal government that controls the police. So now they're agitating and advocating that, you know, the police should be answerable to the state governors.
Or in other words, create state police.
Yes, have state policing. So what now happens in reality is if you allow our chief executive to control the police, just imagine current Nigeria today,
well,
that the executive governors are so powerful.
But it can't be all bad, I'm thinking. Perhaps in my mind, I could think of a few states that perhaps with all of this, you know, level of insecurity, we still see some level of development.
Oh yes, like Borno State. You know, Borno State with the numbers of insecurity, you still see projects being undertaken. You know, you still see big time projects around infrastructure, school, healthcare. And it's important I mention, I've written a couple of freedom of information letters to Borno, and I get responses on access to water. How much did they access from EU, for instance? Because there was a time EU gave them money to provide water facility. So I wrote FOI letters, I got response, and they gave me, you know, data on the communities, and we did outreach just to verify these claims, you know. So yes, and speaking of freedom of information letters as an instrument to engage state governors, during COVID, the federal government gave 1 billion to each governors, except Lagos that got 5 billion. And I wrote to all the executive governors, what did you do with your 1 billion? And how much have you used state resources in COVID-19? And for what purposes? Because for us, we wanted to collect data on what the governors are doing, how the state is responding. Are they gender friendly? Are they youth friendly? You know, what are the gaps? What are the opportunities? None of them responded except Akwa Ibom. And Akwa Ibom responded and they said that they are not bound by law, that the Freedom of Information Act is a federal government law. So them as a state, they've not domesticated it, so they're not bound by law. And this letter was signed by the state commissioner for the state attorney general and commissioner for justice. Signed this letter. Someone who is learned by law is telling me that it's a federal. And mind you, there are two parallel judgments around the freedom of information. There's a justice that said that this is a law recognized in Nigeria. So there's nothing like federal or state law. It is a law. But there's another judgment that contradicts that one. But then again, as an advocate, and for state governors that always pride themselves that, oh, they are anti-corruption, they fight against corruption. What is there to give citizens information on how you're expending 1 billion for COVID-19 and how you're using state resources to fight COVID-19 pandemic, you know, during that time where they were locked down, where young people are losing their jobs, and, you know, there was economic hardship in the states.
I mean, not surprising. We saw what we saw during.
Oh yes, again, yes, you saw
where
people,
warehouses
where
and
yes, and you see, you know, you saw in these warehouses where they've even branded. Some politicians have branded Indomie, and they are waiting for 2023 campaign season to use. You know, it just shows you how shallow-minded these people are, and these are products that have expiry dates. So for them, they're not even thinking futuristic. They just want to keep people impoverished, have people suffer during COVID-19, and want to use, you know, palliative, even donated by CACOVID for political gain.
All right, just before we round up, a quick question now. The dwindling fortunes of government at the center and dwindling resources available to be shared to states has made some states more unfixable than ever. Now, any attempts to generate IGR has gone to the dogs. Do you buy the argument in some quarters that some states should be merged with others? Very quickly.
So we have 36 states. What is the pride of even having 36 states? What do we pride ourselves as a federation or federation unit that have 36 states? What can some of our states actually boast of or show off? And when you look at data of IGR, Kaduna State, for instance, is doing very well. You know, it beats me that Kaduna is generating more revenue than Kano. Kano, that have population, that have one of the biggest markets in northern Nigeria, is not generating as much internal revenue as much as Kaduna State. What this also shows you is there are leakages. There are leakages in internally generated revenue. Let's even take the FCT, for instance. Let's not even go, or let's use Nasarawa State.
Okay.
You would see that AMAC would come, that you would pay, you pay AMAC tax. FCT would come, FCDA would come and say you pay their tax. If you go to Nasarawa State, for instance, because Nasarawa State is an economic hub because they share boundary with the FCT, there's so many different level of taxes, and this burden is mostly on poor traders, where you have to buy this ticket, you have to pay for this ticket, the market union will come, you pay for this, you pay for that, and yet you're not even seeing dividends of this, your tax money in maybe infrastructure in the state, or maybe you have access to free medical care. No. So there's burden on citizen and multi-taxation, but then there are leakages in this tax. When you even try to follow, you know, all this collection, at one point you get stuck. It's just as if some political godfather has appointed someone in this, the political system, they've shared it among themselves, and whatever you get from this area, you just keep it. That's your own, you know, political benefit for supporting us into office.
Unfortunately, this is where we'll have to wrap up this segment of the program. I'd like to thank you all for being a part of the program today. My guest has been Mr. Hamzat Lawal, who is an activist, a successful gentleman who has led grassroots campaigns in over 40 African countries, and of course the chief executive of Code, based here in Abuja. We'll continue this conversation next week. Please make it a point of duty to join us at 6:30 on Monday, same time, same station next week. My name is Aonduna Ingia. Good evening.
The Nigerian governors.